Hi. Hello. Welcome to a Modstream. Don't ask why you were looking at the Darian Ha 2 emoji at the beginning of that. That was just a very epic camera placement by me. Welcome. What's going on? So we do have a little bit of housekeeping to do. Veek has been working on some AI-related stuff, and I wanted to take a quick look at that to try to figure some stuff out. I was out all day today. Well, at least in the morning and afternoon. Came back and crashed a little bit. Here I am. We're back. So let's take a look here. If you're not aware, Veek has recently updated a bunch of things related to AI compilation that allows you to essentially pre-process certain commands and automatically generate code that can be quite useful. So this would basically be like allowing you to generate code that no human would ever want to write for all of the edge cases or all of the specific cases, but still quite useful in that respect. So hopefully we don't run into any size related issues as a result of that, but basically the idea is that you can have as much as you want of that sort of thing. And you can also include certain files, and you can, do all sorts of stuff. So in this case, we've got a common ASC3 file. This would be included into other files, for example, the Melee AI. And it would define basic things like blank return, all that stuff. And I don't know what the U is here. I'm not sure if that's ever used in the future. It doesn't seem like it, but now we have meant to be included outside of any block. So I assume you would just, this means like when you're writing this stuff at the very beginning, like maybe at the very top, you could do include common. Meant to be called after script name and script ID. Well, I guess you could do, so you could include your stuff before you even write script name and script ID, presumably. I suppose that could, in theory, be useful for organizing, but I actually don't know if that's true. I'm pretty sure the whole thing needs to be called after that. But maybe in this particular case, I guess it's because like this is the header, so that's why you would call it in that precise location, whereas this include thing, rather like you would call the header macro, and then that would be something that you call in script name, by the way, and you'd call that right after that, whereas you could include the file presumably wherever, I guess. So this is basically the header file for the Melee AI. It's pretty universal. Calls some common sense header commands, sets some variables up, and basically initializes them. And this is used in some UMS, very, very niche UMS cases where you're detecting if an AI has been run. So you're basically detecting if the player that is in slot 1, for example, is an AI, means there was no human player occupying that slot when the game was started. So you can like change that up depending on what you want to do. So for example, I might use this in a case where I have a mapcrap map and I'm using Hydra's Melee AI, and in certain situations, there's going to be transmissions from that player if Kadar and Crystal exists as a death, set to 1. Pretty basic stuff there. So that just tells you like, oh yeah, I should use AI related things, and it's useful for actually having that knowledge. Now, this is calling a macro, I believe. I actually do have some information, some documentation. Yeah, executes macro, multi-block, or call block. So under attack loop, in that sense, is down here, and it is a multi-block. So when we execute this, we would be essentially multi-running its functionality. Looks like most of these, if not all. So this one's call block. This is attack add replacement. This is a replacement for Q. Attack add Q unit. Q structure. Looks like there's some work done with upgrades and whatnot. So basically what I asked Veek to look into doing was actually putting together a setup, like a file like this, a list of functions that will perform as good, if not better, than Hydra's current setups, while being a lot easier to include and potentially even modify on a per script basis. In this case, we would basically be calling things like the under attack loop or whatever. We probably don't need to modify. It's a fairly good constant. But in the cases where we are, for example, trying to attack add something, we want to have some freedom with regards to how we actually handle that sort of thing. So we're basically creating functions, right? So in this case, V created a series of functions that we can now call or multi-run or whatever. We can execute these macro-oriented functions, and check resources, check gas, check supply. I wonder what those do. Okay, so this is wait supply, wait gas, wait resource. So this basically I'm not sure why there would be a wait 24 here. But basically all of these things that I was multi-running have been converted into functions in some capacity. Or not all of them yet, but some of them. Okay, so it waits. What's up, Hoop? Are you on Twitch? Something go wrong with the YouTube stream? Okay, actually, never mind. That makes sense. So we'd be setting wait rest to 0. Yeah, I'm streaming later than usual today. Had some stuff to do in the morning and in the afternoon. Here we are in the evening. Most of the audience that normally gravitates towards these streams knows to check for me in the morning, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a general lower numbers or whatever. I'm just continuing the streak. So it looks like there's still, this is going to give Veek a lot of things to add features to the preprocessor for. But we're getting there. So I just wanted to quickly take a look at this because this is essentially the future in many respects of writing Starcraft AI. Even though we're presumably not going to be doing too much of that, considering we intend to move on to a new engine. But definitely interesting stuff. So I guess I'll toss that into an AI folder for now, so that I don't misplace it. And then we will move on to the pièce de résistance, the centerpiece. So let's get some work done on the sword. Check out my T for Tony. So the sword is the third mission of Deliverance. If I pop into my browser here and jump over to the page, you'll note I don't actually have much of a description, so I should probably get that done at some point. Maybe that could be a nice opening. But I mostly am looking to crack that, like, there's always the problem of figuring out the blank canvas issue. Sometimes you have this inspiration and you just vomit forth a map into existence, a map's outline into existence. Other times you really need to like make something and then say, all right, I'm going to have to change this pretty much completely, but at least I now know what I'm going to be doing. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you need to just stop it from being a completely blank canvas before you can really make something that feels inspired or feels true to form. It's just like a sense that you have when you're creating stuff. And it's certainly a lot easier to make gray box level shit in your trusty SCM Draft 2 than it is in like a 3D game or anything like that. So we've got that going for us. But as people know from watching the previous streams this week, you can sink a lot of time into the decor and into the fine tuning of the environment. And we almost always do that. So let's do the sword. Oh, sword. Okay. So the size of this map is quite large. I believe it is 256 by 224. I guess I should Iraq, born, Dithroki. Probably add in who's who. Now here we have Salamir and Deimos. And we decided on 3 Zerg enemies. Iraq, Gorn, Dithroki. Chase. Although, actually, it might make more sense for Lanigan to be leading these guys. Or ordering these guys around in some way. So we'll probably do that. He's the one who's all about... Lanigan is like the scientist. It doesn't really make sense for him to be leading or ordering the men around, like the actual military stuff. So I'm not sure if that's really like something that makes sense, but I feel like outside of that feeling like a logic hole, it still is okay. Because, like, there's got to be a term for this, where there's, like, technocracy or something, where it's, like, a built-on technology or whatever. At least that's what I would assume based on the name. I haven't actually looked into, like, definition of technocracy. A government or social system controlled by technicians, especially scientists and technical experts. Okay, so yeah, the Umojan Federation may very well be a technocracy then. And in that sense, there would be like military specialists or officers or advisors that feed information over to whatever it's called. Like, they might inform the leader, but I mean, in many respects, like it's almost like you would have these sub commanders who are they're doing the job of the military army ordering stuff. Like they are the military officer, but they're answering to a scientist. Like Chase, in many respects, answers to Lanigan in that sense, even though Lanigan is way less experienced when it comes to combat or whatever, and is really just the scientist. He's the big boss. So I don't know if that makes sense for Lanigan to be the one who's actually like throwing his weight around from a military perspective, but it would make sense I guess for Lanigan to want to manually oversee the operation that involves abducting the Cerebrate. And Chase would be more useful. Chase being like the lieutenant type character, the actual military commander character. He would be more useful, like in a frontal engagement where there's a lot more variables. Like a smaller surgical strike team might be more manageable for Lanigan. So that's my thought process anyway. Yeah, technocracy feels like as just a layman who hasn't studied it at all, it feels like a sci-fi term, like something that's never existed before. Maybe there have been cases where it's popped up in real life, but I'm no historian, so I haven't really studied that stuff. But it doesn't feel like a real thing, because I don't really know who would really come up with the idea that that's a good idea, like, or who would really be able to make a convincing argument for a technocracy. Like I can't imagine making a convincing argument for that. You know what I mean? So like I could come up with like an idea that, okay, right. So like if you're gonna say that an elected official takes on specialist advisors to give them the most information that they most usable information that they can have to they can use to improve their like being in the know or whatever, right? They can give them the most usable information. That makes sense to me. But that's not a technocracy. That's an elected individual in a democratic environment saying that he's going to trust experts to give him some information or whatever, right? So I could see the utility of it, but I couldn't imagine like diverting policy making apparatus to a just a scientific expert. You know what I mean? I mean, I could see where, like, in a utopian sense, yeah, maybe it would make sense if you could really trust the scientists or the specialists to do the right thing by the people, despite not being elected by them. Right? Yeah. Well, some people on Facebook argue that that already happened. Probably because that was probably like the it's not the last time, but it's one of the last times where you could have um, like you really might get somewhere with one of those movements. Before it felt like the shit wasn't set in stone as much, if that makes sense. Looking back at it from where we are now, you feel like there was a good chance for pretty much any party or any political movement that had the numbers behind it, that had the groundswell. Whereas now you need way more than just numbers of civilians, numbers of citizens. to make something happen, you need like somehow to infiltrate the establishment. That's the sense that I have anyway. Whereas it feels like none of that fucking, or not as much of that bureaucratic shit was fully embedded into the systems, at least in America, or should I say, in the United States of America. Okay, so here we have, I'm not really sure. When I first came up with the size, direction, location breakdown of missions, it was actually for Inconsummate, where there was, it was for Bloodfaust, I guess, the sequel to Inconsummate, where you would be like swapping around in perspective. In this case, every mission is going to be macro. Every mission you're playing is Protoss, and with the exception of the first mission, every mission is pretty large scale. So I don't really think there's much value in noting that. Whereas if I specify the number of players who are there, and maybe like the essence of the mission, like the Anvil is more of a aggression-based mission, or it's more aggressive with a bit of a mild state change in the middle. Like if I can find some way to note that in a terse way, that might be more useful as far as direction goes. So instead of saying like large Protoss macro, I could say like I can do like early aggro, partial state change, once Terrans are found. And I'll say combatants. And we can do that instead, I think. And so here we would say well, you're not, the technocracy shit has nothing to do with the main story. This, you're playing as Protoss in this. And I'm pretty sure it was hammer and sickle, not hammer and anvil. I don't think the anvil has anything to do with communist ideology. These are just, it's like, the only one that I'm not crazy about is the helm. But these are basically like, I was looking for 1 or 2 syllable words that described like pieces of armor or whatever. And you can see the whole listing down here. The hammer, the anvil, the sword, the shield, the sheath, the helm, the Great Retaliation. And obviously the Great Retaliation is the one that bucks all the fucking trends, but that's sort of the point. But yeah, I've never heard of the anvil being associated with. Like the saying, the hammer and the anvil or whatever is like, I mean, that's what you use for smelting. That's like, that's where the symbology gets a lot of its power. So you use that for, or not smelting, but smithing, or whatever the term is when you're smashing weapons together. And that's more of where that symbology is trying to lead you to. I don't think, anyway, that like nobody else has brought up commie ideology or commie symbolism. So hopefully people aren't jumping to such conclusions, but I feel like with the framing being that you're in Protoss, you're playing as Protoss the entire time. I don't think people will be drawn into that direction anyway. So, for the most part, one can hope. I don't know why. See, what gets me about UED Commander is that, like, depending on what side of the bed he woke up on, he's either a big advocate for communism or he calls everybody who wants to try communism an idiot. So I don't really know what his actual point of view on it is, because I'm always like I've been pretty sardonically derogatory when it comes to communism. I'm just like, you fucking idiots, which is sometimes what he says, but other times he's like, what do you mean it's a great idea, or something. I don't know, like, I don't want to put words in the guy's mouth, but it just seems really weird. He just takes these seemingly very in opposition positions on this topic. Maybe it's just the duality of man. He's trying to figure out how he can advocate for this utopian ideal. But he probably gets mad at Antifa. Who doesn't get mad at Antifa, seriously? All right, so we got the sword. So this will be like I don't want it to sound too imposing here, but I'm trying to look for like a word that would describe like a fundamental, straightforward. Yeah, I guess straightforward might be it. I'm still not sure if I want to throw in like a fledgling Zerg survival like cockroach player as to keep the free for all dream alive in this mission, or if I want it to be more of like a dedicated Protoss versus Terran. I feel like without at least some Zerg presence, you might like lose sight of them as a main antagonizing force, even though they aren't particularly demanding or. Okay, so like the problem with this is that it's so alt history that it gives you a very different understanding of what's going on in this invasion. Like the Conclave are willing to potentially glass ire despite the insane morale drop that would occur from that, and the symbolic defeat that would come across as that. It's like the ultimate sacrifice for the entire people, basically, is their homeworld being glassed. Because in this setting, it's not like there's only one fucking planet for the Protoss, so this isn't nearly as ridiculous as like the main story made it out to be. But the idea is that they still don't want to lose their fucking homeworld, so some of the characters are like really, I mean, pretty much none of the characters are. None of them like the idea, but to varying degrees, they all understand where the advocates of that idea are coming from. So I can't really present. I don't have like the real estate to present a compelling argument for glassing the planet beyond trying to paint the. Like, I'm trying to use the fact that some members of the Conclave that are not actually presented to the player. It's just like off screen or whatever. Like it's established based on dialogue that this is something that's in conversation that people are debating, and I don't have the real estate to like have a fucking Greek chorus that goes over that shit, or like a series of meetings between like the Judicator character Nerazan and the actual rest of the Conclave and the other Judicators. Like I don't want to bog the story's presentation down with that, but it's important to the plot because it figures into how one of the characters ends up dying, and it also figures into like the fall from grace of the Conclave in the eyes of many Protoss, where they're willing to take the step instead of coming up with literally any other solution. But I don't want it to be like a black and white thing, because it's obviously not very compelling, nor is it very sensible. Like, there should be potentially other things that can work, but when the emojis start fucking shit up in here, it's gonna get a little wacky. Like, one of the main advocates, like that was like leading the counter proposal, that was working on a plan that would allow the Zerg to be usurped without needing to glass ire, is Nerazan. He's like one of the people who's like leading the charge against this idea, and he ends up getting captured by the emojis, and his entire plan goes to shit to some extent, like disrupted very heavily. And it's not even like he can come up with a new one, because he's captured by the emojis. He's not even able to exact or like to try to figure out some sort of contingency or fallback, which leaves the Conclave in a decision where they don't really have like a unified voice of opposition to their plan, to the other plan. So it makes sense that they would go this route, and we kind of have to use the fact that they're even considering it at all to establish that it is legitimate, which feels like circular logic, right? In some ways it is. But it's like, if the Conclave are willing to potentially destroy their own homeworld, the threat must be serious if you assume that the Conclave is competent in some way, if they're worth some respect. Then any idea that they are seriously considering must have some sort of backing to it in real world ramifications or whatever. So I need to present the Zerg as very threatening, which means if I don't have Zerg in a mission, it distracts from that point, and it sort of like allows the player to forget about Zerg. And I don't want to do that. I want the Zerg to feel very, very much like a persistent force. It's just that the emojis definitely take center stage for a little bit, and that does compete with, like, in terms of themes or in terms of plot elements, that competes in terms of the real estate with the idea that the Zerg are incredibly important and so threatening that it may be wise to just glass the entire planet. So that's like a current inner struggle I'm having with in terms of like smoothing out this part of the story. I think maybe there should be some sort of, like, in a perfect world where I wasn't limited by time, maybe a second draft of this or something what might involve more engagements with the Zerg before the emojis show up. Like maybe 2 full missions where you're just fighting Zerg, and the emojis show up in the 3rd mission instead of the 2nd, and they sort of scale up more from a smaller point of involvement, where, okay, they're here and they are deploying on the surface, which is a big deal. It's yet another alien race that's setting foot on Ire, and they are not allied. They are definitely hostile. They're here to like, we don't know why they're here. Their motivations are not clear, but definitely a force with some sort of malicious intent, and we got to stop them, just like we got to stop the Zerg. I don't know. Because the problem right now is, in the first time that we see them in the 2nd mission, they are a juggernaut type force in that map that must be beaten back for the player to claim victory. But like that's supposed to be your taste of them when there's 3 Protoss forces deployed to this area, and it takes them a fair bit of time just to kill the to drive back this one Terran force, right? So my intended gameplay loop of the second mission is that you spend your time fighting Zerg, and the Emojins come in and sort of steal the show in that sense. They dismantle parts of the Zerg. They literally abduct the Cerebrate that you were there to capture yourself, as per Nerazan's plan, and they push all of the Protoss characters that are there. They push you all to your limits, and like if your gameplay experience followed the story I've got in my head, you are barely able to put them to bed before moving on to the next mission. And that next engagement is a much more fair battleground where, like, okay, the Emojins haven't taken you by surprise like they did in the second mission, but there's also like 2 or 3 of them, and it's 2 or 3 Protoss, and it's like a straightforward team battle where it's like a 2v2 or a 3v3 or whatever. And that means that you should be very scared of the Terrans in terms of what they could potentially do, right? If the second mission goes the way that I think it will in most people's first playthroughs, they are going to be brought, like, they're really going to be tested by the Terrans. And then they're going to fight the Terrans in the next mission and think, holy shit, like, one of them was bad enough. Now I've got to deal with 2 or 3 or however many there are in terms of active Terran forces. And they're going to have different personalities because it's a different leader, but even so, it's still going to be like the same faction, and they're going to have access to the same tech. So there's a lot there that needs to be unpacked. But the reason I'm thinking about all of this right now is if there's not any Zerg presence, and even if there is some Zerg presence, but it's not very threatening, and it's not very potentially destabilizing, it's not something that can really turn the tide of the battle one way or the other, then the Zerg feel less relevant to the main story, which saps at the relevance of a lot of the other plot lines. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Emojins are going to be modified from Hydra Terran, and Hydra Terran is already, like, if you've never played Hydra, you're adapting to the Protoss tech tree, you're going to be adapting to the Zerg tech tree in the first 2 missions, basically, and then out of nowhere, fucking Terrans show up, and they're using, like, Southpaws and Paladins and Madrigals and Centaurs and fucking Savants and, like, Apostles. Like, one of the AIs, probably one that you'll meet in the 3rd mission, is going to be very heavily based around bio, and to the point where they're going to have, like, 50 barracks, they're going to have hundreds of Marines, and they're going to make exhaustive use of the healing unit that hasn't been implemented yet. It's called the Apostle. And this unit gets an ability at Science Vessel Tech, or Science Facility Tech, that in an area of effect around the unit, it basically injects a chemical agent or a biological agent, whatever. The actual science part of the science fiction is not important. But basically it injects them with a sort of serum that revives them after they die. And this doesn't, it's not like you can only revive with the same unit once or anything. It's as many times as you can do that. There's a cast time on it, so it's a little bit more micro-dependent than you think at first glance. But you can imagine where this is like the kind of thing that you would, you want to be very careful around. And so if you just walk in and you see like armies of Marines that are all got the read for the fact that they're enhanced in this way, like, holy moly, man, you better bring some Reavers or something, because there's going to be men rising from the dead to fight again. And that's going to be like some of the tech that, just because like Apostles will be relatively new to even Hydra, like basic Hydra, when this campaign is done, you're going to see some pretty epic content from that, I think. Just because it's going to feel very much like a Emojin unit, because the Emojins are going to be using this unit to, like, basically get way more value out of their units than they would otherwise. So I'm really looking forward to seeing stuff like that. Plus, we're going to have, like, kiting micro and whatnot, which is obviously going to specifically affect Terrans in a very different way, like vultures and even Marines and tanks. When they're able to kite, like, okay, yeah, Hydra's doing it. That might be good. Mutalisk's doing it, obviously pretty impressive for an AI to do that compared to what we're used to. But when the Terrans roll in and most of their units can benefit from kiting and the AI does it to some degree of competence, like, they are going to feel like a very different enemy that you've never fought before. So even one of them being that strong is going to be like, it's almost like still pulling punches. Even though one of these guys is going to be in a position where he might be able to challenge all three Protoss players, the human player and his two allies, you're still like that. That's not really that far like out. You know what I mean? If they have enough bases and the Zerg have occupied the Protoss players long enough, you can easily see where that becomes pretty. It becomes easy to potentially disrupt the entire game flow and make the Terrans to be like very, very scary, even if they can't necessarily close against three players. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that in action, but you got overrun by a zillion Zerglings. Was that like what was that anyway? Was that a Mapcraft map or something? There is an AI personality in Hydra's Melee that spams out a million Zerglings. So, oh, the Terran 1 map. You were just. Oh, right, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and they had like a million defilers too. I think you guys eventually killed them, but it took forever. Or maybe you didn't. I don't remember. I remember Balathal. I think Balathal killed them eventually. But that was some fucking crazy stuff, yeah. Like, just to think that that's the first map of the Hydra campaign too. Like, that's what's possible. I don't know, man. I'm really pumped to see, like, even though I know there's going to be a ton of concessions, it's not going to be finished to the quality standard that I would like, because we're doing this as a map crap. There's a time constraint and all that. I'm really looking forward to seeing like what the final draft version of this stuff is for the full toilet thing, and then I'll worry about like polishing it up or whatever. But I think it's going to be pretty cool. So we have. Yeah, I mean, it's really one. Like they're sort of meant to play off of each other. Chase is the Quentin Chase is the character that's like the more career military, like you're describing, but even he's like, I forget exactly. I wrote out a little bit of the. It was like the character. Let's see. Yeah, so there's this what's called the Daybreak program, which is what Arnold Lanigan, which is the head scientist of the Daybreak program. So the Daybreak program is described as the culmination of the Emojin Federation's research and development regarding Zerg. The goal of the program is to assert control over a brood and assess the viability of using the swarm as a weapon. So I didn't put too much information here on it, but the basic idea is that they are attempting to, like, really, like, put this science to the test and see what value they can get behind it. And they clearly believe in the potential behind it as a nation, because they're sending in all of the military prowess that you end up seeing. And so even like the ragtag, well, not really ragtag, but even the career military men have this reverence or respect for science and for the power that science can bring you. Whereas you aren't going to see that. Like, I mean, even it's a very silly example, but in the Brood War micro mission in the Terran campaign, where the Marine goes, "I hate computers," and it's just this gag. Even though it was just a gag, it still presented you with the idea that basically, like, the basic military guy doesn't even know how to use a fucking computer, and doesn't really have any particular respect for technology and all that shit. Like, that's not at all even like even though that's a very comedic undertone. I don't want to present that at all when it comes to Umoja. Like, this is basically an entire nation, an entire uh, government that is built off of the whole thing about, like, technology, science, that sort of thing. And it shows in the fact that they would be considered potentially a technocracy, even if they don't self-describe themselves. It's not the Umojan technocracy; it's the Umojan Federation. But they may not actually describe themselves, or they may describe themselves as a technocracy. But it's not really that important in terms of, like, the actual branding. It's more important if I'm able to properly provide the feeling of, like, yeah, these guys are like that. Like, they feel like a technocracy. That's more important than whether or not they're called it, obviously. So, technically subservient to Lanigan's endless demands. So, yeah, there's plenty of retooling that will probably go into that sort of thing. But, I mean, even the average Marine in the Umojan military has some understanding and appreciation for technology, because, like, it's what gave them the ability to be healed by shamans. It's what gave them the ability to rise again from the dead by virtue of apostles. Like, it's what allowed them to stand behind siege tanks and paladins and other, like, weapons of war. It's what improved their quality of life on the front lines, even if it doesn't necessarily feel like it, because they're still dying by the fucking truckload. But, like, there should be a sense that they all value that sort of thing, right? And I think that you'll get that just by virtue of them microing a little bit, them feeling a bit more like, well, you won't get that sense for the individual units, but you'll get the sense that the army commander actually values the technology because they're deploying it in such numbers and they're using it in somewhat competent fashions. Like, you're going to get that. Like, you could either look at that as, wow, that's a very competent player, or you could look at it as, like, that army commander knows what's going on here. So, hopefully, for immersion's sake, I'm able to have it lay more on the latter, where it's more about the army commander and what their appreciation is for certain things and their proficiencies with them. But even at the end of the day, if players are just conceptualizing their enemies as other players, that's also fine for me. It's bridging the gap between a human player and what people typically conceptualize AI in a single player environment as, which is something I've talked about ad nauseum and certainly a big deal for me. One of the other things that's going to be really neat about not the sword, but actually the fourth mission, the shield, you're going to be sieging a science vessel, like a Umojan vessel. And, I mean, I don't know if I'll actually call it a science vessel, because then it's like, well, they built 30 of those in the previous mission, so how the fuck is this that important? But That's just because Blizzard has been pretty bad with scaling. So I'll probably just have this be a command ship or something, like instead of it calling it a science vessel. But the idea is that it's a very large command ship. You're sieging it to withdraw your to try to rescue your leader. Yeah, research station, something like that, and they're going to deploy like everything they got to try to hold on to the station. And at some point, when things get desperate enough, there is going to be a point where you're going to see they will even deploy Zerg as their mind controlled cerebrate or whatever. They will deploy that as despite the fact that in theory they may not be able to control it perfectly yet, and that'll even be some sort of like there'll be some dialogue event or exchange there where between the two Terran characters, I think, where like the scientist one would be ordering the release and deployment of the Zerg character. Yeah, no. No. And it's just a devourer, like in my playthrough. But yeah, there's going to be something like that where they deploy the Zerg as an enemy, and obviously it'll be like somewhat accelerated in its deployment because it'll be starting in the middle of the map, so it'll almost be like the player is arriving instead or joining in the middle of the map as opposed to being there from the beginning. So it's really weird too, because usually the science character or whatever is being pushed around by the military character, I feel like, in all of these cases. And maybe they do something rash and disobey like directives from the military. Like if you this is a very old example, but I was watching Day of the Dead, I think it is. The one where they have the tamed zombie and he shoots a guy in the head or something. So there was that, but like that was the case where like the military commander was very clearly like he was painted as an asshole, but he was also like the one calling the shots, and the science characters were doing things behind his back. And in this case, I don't think there will be any like breaking ranks or doing things behind anybody's back per se, but Chase is actually taking orders, like the military guy is taking orders from the science guy, which I think is a really interesting reversal of that, because I mean, it's not just interesting if that's all it is it's a reversal, but the fact that I have that up my sleeve, and I know that I know what Lanigan's tendencies are, and I know that he's like very devoted to his craft, and he's maybe believes in himself too much, and you know, he sort of buys into his own bullshit, I guess is the phrase that I've heard used, where like you're overconfident in a way. Maybe that could be used to describe him, right? Maybe that would be a fair descriptor. And Lanigan is going to be in a position where he basically like he will be giving Chase an ultimatum that it's already unacceptable that Protoss are on the vessel, but he has X number of minutes before Lanigan makes the call to deploy the Zerg to flush them out. And so now it's like this resolves a couple of issues, because I was worried that I would have to wait until the Protoss players killed X number of units from the Terrans or production structures or defeated one of the players or some other performance-based checkpoint where it's like it's very dynamic in terms of what would trigger the Zerg to be released. And that was a pitfall that I had a lot for things in Consummate back in the day, where if you destroy this set of structures, then another set activates, or another AI comes online after this one of these three different options or conditions are met. And it was basically like punishing the player in a way for being good, or potentially just doing things out of order or whatever. And it led to a pretty toxic game state for those maps, where you're like, if you destroy a set of Stargates and another set of Stargates activates, but that second set creates more higher tier units than the first set, like it builds more carriers or something, you're actually not getting an advantage by clearing out those Stargates in the first place, unless you're getting an expansion or something. But it's not like a net advantage. It's just like unlocking more shit for you to clear out later. So it feels like you're almost like being punished, really. So in this case, if it's just a time thing, then it's fair, for lack of a better term, because the Zerg are going to arrive at the same time no matter what, and you'll just have to clear out enough Terrans so that when the Zerg do arrive, it's you're able to be prepared in some way. And your performance will determine how overwhelming the Zerg deployment ends up feeling like. So you at least know when it's going to happen, and that's a big deal for me. The other thing that this does is it establishes a very clear like chain of command. Like if you were already a little curious about how the Emojin chain of command works, when Lanigan is the one calling the shots, like Lanigan is going to be introduced to you in the second mission when you make contact with his forces, and he's going to be very much like confident. You could call him an asshole, perhaps, but competent. Like not overconfident for like, if he is overconfident, it's not by such an extreme margin as for him to be laughable. Like lately I've been playing that shitty Batman game, and Riddler is a character in there that is super overconfident, considering even though he's able to have all of these technical contraptions and they work, and it's like very comic book logic, like, yeah, he somehow managed to make this shit work despite the fact that he still can't beat Batman. Even though he apparently has the same amount of resources as Batman does, given how much shit that he actually assembles. Like, he builds fucking robots and stuff. Like, despite the fact that that's the case, he's not actually competent. So, that's kind of like fridge logic competence, I guess, where he's competent enough to build these fucking weird racetracks and these puzzles and capture other characters and hold them hostage. But he's not competent enough to actually win over the protagonist. So I don't want to have it be like that, where Lanigan is like overcompensating or something. I don't know. It is there's a potential pitfall there that you can fall down. So definitely don't want that to be the case. But anyway, because I know what Lanigan's tendencies are, because I know the inner workings of the Emojin sort of rank and file, their chain of command, it's going to be really cool. I think that'll be a cool way to explain that. Like, we don't need to say Lanigan's calling the shots here. The Terran known as Lanigan is their leader. Like, we don't need dialogue that's like that, because we just have Lanigan say, like, issue very clear orders, and also very clearly, like, be the one who knows a lot about what's going on. Like, when you're introduced to him in the second mission, he's going to be very clear, like, he knows why he's here. He doesn't really tell you why he's here, per se. Maybe he doesn't necessarily hide it either, but, like, he's not going to come out and say, this is my master plan, blah, 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 here's what the Daybreak program is, here's some exposition. He's just rather matter-of-fact about it. And then Chase would be more like a more conventional career military guy, where he gives them an opportunity to surrender or something in the third mission. And maybe even hints at what the Emojins are doing next, because in the third mission, after the Emojins are beaten back, like, the Emojins are actually intending to evacuate and leave the surface of the planet temporarily while they conduct their experiments and progress with the Daybreak research. And so the program is being worked on, and the Emojins are theoretically going to be leaving, but at some point they're going to catch wind of the fact that the Protoss know where their research station is and are planning on sieging it. So then these ground forces remain deployed to, like, sort of bar their way in that sense. And yeah, like, the problem, I don't really like relying on the Emojin transmission thing, I actually do think it's fine for the emojis to directly speak to the Protoss. It's just that, like, I don't know how to write myself out of that hole. Like, I don't want it to feel so, like, oh yeah, we just intercepted these transmissions. Whatever. I don't know. I guess I can do something like that, since we do have a bit of a technological minded character, Deimos, who would be he's like a utilitarian type character in a sense, where he's very much a supporting character. Like, he's not really a protagonist or anything like that, but I could see him basically saying, like, he's the aide, he's the Judicator's aide, and he's got nobody to aid, to be an aide for once the Judicator gets fucking abducted. So I could see him basically tagging along and being like, I have been able to crack the Terran comms network, or blah 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 blah. I will filter through their transmissions and play back any that would be useful to the battle effort or something. Like, I could have a line like that, right? And assuming I actually wrote it well, it probably wouldn't even seem out of place. But I do feel like it's still a cliche or a plot contrivance in a sense, where it's like, okay, yeah, we have the ability, an insight into their characterization, into these interactions between these characters. It does give us useful battle information. It gives us some useful combat information in a sense, but I don't really see an alternative to it. But it does feel like it's been done so many times. I guess at least it would be in service to actual character development and world building, and like, it would be in service to something high quality. So maybe that justifies it. But I am typically not crazy about that. I guess it's fine, but I'll try to think of something that's a bit more compelling than just hacking their comms or intercepting their transmissions. At least if it, like, one of the main problems is, why aren't we getting every single transmission? I mean, I know why. It's because it would be impossible to have focus on the game, so it would be bad in that respect, and obviously it'd be really expensive to, like, time wise to write out all this dialogue and do all the voice acting for it. So I know why in a gameplay sense, in a non-immersion sense. So at least in the example where Deimos is filtering through the transmissions, it's like, oh, you actually have somebody who's choosing to share this stuff with you at the expense of their own time or something like that. So it almost justifies it in lore why you're only getting some important transmissions. So it's not like I've deemed them important. I mean, it is, but it's not just the writer thinks that this line is important, so you're listening to it. It's also like, Deimos thinks this line is important, so he's playing it back to you so that you can take a look at it. You know, like, Deimos thinks this is important information for your battle effort. So, like, it's sort of a layer of abstraction that allows you to persist with your immersion. Like, it doesn't break the suspension of disbelief as much, I think. So maybe it's okay. The other problem is that I have a pretty large cast of characters to fit into 7 missions. Hopefully I can do that. Because in addition to the Emojin stuff, I also have to, like, somehow find time to world build my replacement for the whole tribes thing. I don't know, man. That might just need to be cut in the interest of time and pacing. You lose out on pretty much everything that sets up the quote-unquote sequel or whatever, but I guess that's okay because this is just the first draft of the campaign. So, and after that, we're moving on to a new engine. But that would get rid of 2 characters that I don't really know how to work into the story right now. I mean, I could, but it would just end up being very bloated. I'll think more on that later on. So we have... Could I sneak in an inside joke here? Probably not. Okay. Plugged in some info there. I guess without the Sumerian characters, the story does feel a lot tighter. You lose out that subplot, but you're able to focus entirely on like it just feels less bloated, for lack of a better term, because you've got Conclave Protoss, okay, so you basically have these like couple different strings of events, right? Or plot threads. Conclave divided on whether to glass ire or preserve it through other means due to the Zerg invasion. Umojins come in, fuck shit up, and got to deal with everything related to that. And then, well, I mean, like those are pretty much the twin plot lines. Like everything else is basically spins out from that and is based on resolving those 2 issues or those 2 plot threads. So I guess like the part of the resolution that you could call its own plot thread eventually is how Tauros, and the protagonist of the entire story, falls away from like basically falls out of favor with the conclave, or the conclave loses its luster to this individual. They become disenfranchised, and they start to search for a different civilization or something like that. Like, they basically go into their own sort of self-exile or whatever. I'm not really sure exactly how I would paint that, because the main catalyst for this is a character death, a series of different failings that are established to have been not just during this campaign, but also before it. So, like, this is not just out of the blue. It's not like he's a proud supporter of the Conclave and then he becomes disenfranchised over the course of the campaign. He's already somewhat beleaguered by this whole thing and weary of it and angry about it. So we already have that going for him. But beyond that, we also have, or had, the idea was that with the Sumerian characters, these Protoss that were cast aside or cast out before, that's where he was going to eventually go. He was going to align himself with them and essentially, like, strengthen their ranks and try to bring about a better civilization or whatever outside of Ayer's government. But without them being there to, like, basically we've got a catalyst still, but we don't really have an end point for him to go to. He has to kind of create his own end point in there. So I don't mind that. I think it certainly could work. But I will have to come up with some sort of... Basically, as much as the Sumerian stuff did bloat it, it served a purpose, so I have to come up with some way to fill as much of the void left by their removal as necessary to keep the project sound without going overboard and making it bloated or undercutting development to make it feel like it's missing something, right? So you got to strike that balance. But I do think that getting rid of the whole Sumerian thing allows me to simplify the story, which is a good thing when you're dealing with only 7 maps, not a whole lot of, like, a huge amount of development time to do a bunch of drafting for the story itself, and we don't have the luxury of just adding in a new faction anyway, so it probably makes sense to avoid that entirely. Whereas, like, really the initial idea for the Sumerians were that they would be their own faction and the player would be fighting alongside this very unique faction that would basically have entirely new tech. But we just don't have the luxury of being able to do that, obviously, because of the fact that we don't have the entries. We don't have the unit ID entries. We don't have the AI flexibility. And we certainly don't have the time. So yeah, we'll see how that works. All right. I have set down some pretty good planning for the project overall, and we know that we are going to be... It seems likely that we're going to be removing the whole Sumerian stuff, and maybe we can work that into a second draft in the future when we have the new engine operational or something. But I think it might also be fine if this is just a self-contained story, and I'm sure I can work in the narrative elements that I had going for the closing moment that was really going to feel very epic, very grand scale. I'm sure I can come up with something that's satisfactory for this project and then work in the ideas that I had for this project originally into some other future project. So it's not like it's really going to go to waste. It's just that it won't... I've made the determination, I think, that it doesn't really fit here. So I shall return in a moment. And when I do, we'll be slapping together some more work on the layout Oh, we'll actually start working on the layout, I guess, is a better way to put that. So stay tuned. All right, I'm back. Let's finally get some work done on this map. So we've got to set up the player slots, of course. Now, the thing is, I'm pretty sure I described the Terrans in the second mission as Umojan Task Force. Really what this is Umojan Strike Team. Or something of that nature, where their call sign is a bit more like smaller scale. Task Force, not so much. They actually are going to deploy an insane number of things. So, get ready. I will actually sample the colors here, 62, 52, 76. So that's Tauros, Deimos, Salamir. Reserve, we got 40, 38. Computer. And we got 51 for the... Well, 51 is for Lanigan's forces. So we probably want a different color. What is 51 anyway? That is... Cosmic Cobalt. So if I go into Brood War Resources and I check possible colors, check other blues that are like that. We have Cosmic Cobalt. I'll check Electric Blue, Neon Blue, Glacial, Dark Sapphire. We'll see what these look like. So this is the one that is the existing Terrans. This is what Lanigan's team will look like. And this is Electric Blue. It's a little bright. But definitely that contrast is useful if I'm going to pair these two up. So this could work as Chase's army, since Chase and Lanigan will be serving together. And then maybe there could be a different blue for some of the others. Whereas this, if we compare these two, this is a bit darker. Still decent contrast, but I'm looking at things like the nuclear silo, the vulture. You know, at a glance, I'm not sure that people, especially if they had any sort of color blindness, they would probably have, potentially, possibly, marginally have some issues with that. So this is a bit more like neon blue, but it's actually a bit darker at the edges. Oh, I know, maybe I'm clicking the wrong one. Oh yeah, it's a bit darker. I might consider that as well. This is a little bit more of a nuanced one. So this is glacial. I kind of like this better since it has a bit of a darker tone to parts of it. And it's not so similar to, it's like still very distinct, I think, from the others. So yeah, maybe we'll do that. Whereas this is what? Dark Sapphire. Very, very similar to Cosmic Cobalt. It's even darker. So I could see this working in some contexts. Like maybe this could be the secondary force alongside Chase in the third mission, or in a case where we have Chase and another ancillary task force. My only problem with that is yeah, I actually don't think it would work out very well. I think maybe we would do snow then. I think we'll do glacial and snow. We'll try that. Because if we have a darker color, it's if it's a dark blue in the realm of the darkness of Cosmic Cobalt, like Dark Sapphire is, it's going to be very difficult unless you're seeing Dark Sapphire alongside Cosmic Cobalt, in which case they are a little too similar to immediately pick out, probably especially on the minimap, I would imagine. And if we're in a position like that, it's hard for you to look at that and say, oh, that's a different color than the color that I fought before, so that should be a different personality. Whereas if it's a white color, like snow, we know it's not that other color or whatever, you know what I mean? So I think that's better as far as keeping them separate. What's kind of grinding my gears here is the fact that we have a situation where the like in the story I don't even want Lanigan involved with this assault, so I need a third commander or a third personality or whatever for the Emojins, but adding a third character would be unwieldy. So I don't actually know. Like, I guess I could just have them be a sort of no-name type character, and they're like the support squadron to Chase's main army or something. But I guess we'll see as time goes on. I don't know. Anyway, so we know we're doing snow for the secondary Protoss or secondary Terran, and the primary Terran is going to be, I think we decided on Glacial, which is 46. And so we'll pick that for now. And we can save. And okay. I don't know what you mean by mineral color, Renato, but welcome. Hope you're doing well. So the real question is, what do I do with the actual layout? I do want to construct it so that there's enough room to really have this be a very expansive battleground. The fact that we have 2 Zerg, 2 Terran, 3 Protoss certainly paints it as a distinct battleground. And so I think what I would like is I think what I'll end up doing is, so far the player has started out in the top right and in the bottom left. So I can do this in a few different ways. I mean, the thing is, I think if they were punching into Alnathok and then withdrawing, I think they have to go through Alnathok to get to Scion. So it would make sense for them to show up on the bottom again. Maybe the player could start closer to the bottom middle. I don't want there to be a fatigue about like, oh, I'm starting in the same spot of the map again. But geographically, it makes sense for them to start in the bottom middle or maybe the bottom right. And I think that'll be fine. So we'll at least isolate the Protoss side of things to the bottom, like quadrant of the map, if you will, bottom strip. I think we can have the Terrans have like a sort of offset, like upper right hand start like somewhere over here. If I do some high dirt to mark them out or whatever, so we could have that so that they're somewhere over here as a starting base, and this could be like the main Terran. Or, sorry, the support Terran could be like frontlining, and the main Terran could be back here in a strip over here or something like that. And they would essentially be inside Protoss territory. Like, that, what was previously Protoss territory. So you might even have some sort of scouting information on them, or some sort of information provided by the survivors of the previous conflict. And then the Zerg can sort of be like mid left and upper mid left, like there. And then again, we have like player can be over here with an ally probably right behind him again. And Deimos can be more towards the bottom left, something like this. And this will allow us to have a decent map flow where we're going like, I don't know, I think that might be okay. We will see. So, now we gotta actually dig in and start working on stuff. Now, I typically work from player-focused background. Where is my color here? Okay. Little bit concerned about the player color of Arak and the snow color and the glacial color. That might be a problem. That's okay. We will figure stuff out. Yeah, man, that really blows. I wish there was a way for me to like guarantee that the wow, destroyed. I wish there was a way for me to guarantee that everybody could make out the player colors. Hold on. I don't know how to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 15? Oh, it actually is even. Holy moly, it's 14 on each side. Impressive. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 3. All right, we have some weird architecture. Centerpiece. Fan of that. This probably won't be quite as jungle focused as the previous map, where it was entirely jungle basically. Or it will be when I finish some blends and get everything placed. So I want to say we kind of have to start a new piece of architecture over here. Have to let my mother know what's going on. She's been out for a couple days, so gotta give her a progress report, dude. I do want to make it feel a bit more, what's the term? Honestly, since you can build on ruins now, I might end up blending a lot of this stuff with ruins. Like, just blend all the temple with ruins, and make a lot of this stuff out of ruins instead of just jungle. Not sure what else I would blend with ruins to keep it more varied. I guess I could do some mud or something. But that's the other problem is I'm mostly relying on temple for cliffs in this map. It's temple or high dirt. There's not nearly as much raised jungle, so we're gonna lack the smaller, spaced, like the things that take up less space, but still allow you to gain a height advantage and elevate your height and reposition, and also just provide obstacles and unbuildable stuff and cliffs for expansion borders and stuff, which we had a lot more freedom with when it came to the raised jungle. So I think I'll probably be using, more high dirt and stuff than I have been in the past, or at least than I did in the previous mission. And maybe I'll even have like all of this blending with dirt, or all of this blending with ruins, or something like that. And then just have holes in the ruins itself that either blends with jungle or dirt or whatever it is that I'm looking for. I don't remember. I think I do have jungle blended ramps, so I should be good there. So that should help this mission feel very different, because in the past, ruins were mostly an embellishment, some sort of decoration, and a bit less of a, or not embellishment, flourish. They're a bit less related to, I mean, obviously they don't serve as much of a gameplay purpose anymore because they don't block terrain, right? But they were much less, I don't know, obviously it looks pretty ugly when it's just a bunch of ruins, just like it looks pretty ugly when it's just a bunch of jungle, so sure I'll figure something out about that, but for now this is going to be a defining characteristic, and we'll see what we whittle down in the other areas. But it being so defining, well, it's really like the matter of like keeping things fresh, keeping things varied, making sure that the player is not getting fatigued from playing in around jungle, in the jungle tile set for so many maps in a row. I guess it's not that many, it's only 3 maps in a row, but still. Then there's one space map that we can rely on to buck some trends and add some variety, and then we're straight back down to jungle for the remaining 3. Or is it 2? Yeah, 3. So that just comes at the halfway point. Still useful, but not quite as potentially epic as we might be hoping. So. Okay. Main problem I see here is that the backing player will have less build space than the front-facing Protoss player here, but this should still work out in a way. It'll require a very different kind of build order or build base layout than what the AI will previously have done. So I might actually end up swapping these players, but we'll see. I don't mind having a bit more of a specialized AI layout, but it will add a little bit of dev time. And I mean, there's plenty of build space down here. It's really just, and there will be some up here, so it's really not that big of a deal, I don't think. Okay. Some real rough cut stuff over here. Okay. Not a very inspiring temple layout over there, but we will see what we can pull together. You can definitely see how this map has a ton of different geography when it comes to like how frequently I'm using high dirt by comparison to the other maps. And that is not an accident. But I also kind of want to have this be like a very, feeling almost like it's a chaotic type of border. This will be like a vestige, bit of like a remains of the previous map where we've got some jungle stuff. And as time goes on, as the map progresses, we're going to see that stuff sort of fade out. As you get further into the map, there will be less and less jungle, simply because that's just how this map in particular seems to work. Real meeting of the ramps over there. sure I'll end up radically changing a lot of those outskirts areas. All right. I think we're getting somewhere over here now. It's really just a matter of whether or not I can fit a decent amount of complexity in the interim. I think we should be good. I can do some ramp trickery over there. Because again, I'm looking for ways to like tie in the thematic that this is settled Protoss territory. There's a Protoss force over here protecting high priority targets and whatnot, and they got annihilated, right? So I want there to feel like there was a pretty heavy Protoss presence here. I want the architecture to reflect that. I want it to feel logically in some way set up, even if you don't know why. You at least can reverse engineer based on terrain placement and whatnot that it is somewhat logical. I want that to be the case. I just also want to make sure that I am designing this system based around like function as well as form, you know? I want to make sure that it serves a purpose. So, like, I've already got ideas for where expansions are going to be placed. In a few cases, I know, like, I guess I can just place a mineral field in the spots where I'm going to have them. So that I know what's going on here. Problem is I don't really have any immediate plan for the top strip just yet. Drink. drink all my water. Controlling the middle will be a pretty big deal, not just because of the resources there, but also because of map control. And I really want to underscore that as well. This will be like the first map rather, in the campaign where, I guess the first map has some mid-control element associated with it. Like if we pop open the first map, there's like all of the ramps and how the middle of the map helps connect the rest of it. So like if you're coming at it from the north, the middle of the map allows you to take multiple avenues into the south left, bottom left, bottom right. But you can sort of move around the middle or just sidestep it entirely. It's impactful, but it's not so impactful that it's completely like changing how you experience the rest of it. So to me, that's the distinction. And in this case, it's definitely going to be like very important, even though there's arguably more space to maneuver around. Like there's way more space actually to maneuver around the middle, the centerpiece, in this map compared to the first map, just because the map itself is bigger. It's really going to be impactful, I think. So I'm looking forward to seeing that in action. What I might also decide to do is something like this. Though that does look pretty ugly. Sort of arrowhead type structures. Obviously, the main issue that I can foresee here is a lack of ramps. On the inside. So if I wanted to keep that weird jagged edge thing that I've got going on here, which I think is valuable potentially, that means that the ramps have to be on the outside, which in some ways favors the Terrans because they're the closest, but it's like also favoring having control outside of the middle, which I like. So I mean, obviously you'll be able to use these positions as well there'll be some ramps for reinforcing, but there will be either one singular wider ramp or an even number of ramps on the outside compared to the inside, so that you'll be able to leverage a position of strength on the outside in that respect. So yeah, I think that there's still some pretty good potential there. I didn't really count off how much this was. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I might have gone one over, actually, but just do this. That way we have that added bit of symmetry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, it actually was correct. Good to know. Okay. Playing fast and loose with geometric patterns. But as it turns out, not really ideal. Okay. Hmm. So the main thing I'm trying to accomplish right now is creating enough of a... As far as like symmetry goes, I'm trying to maintain symmetry with the surrounding pieces. But I'm also trying to maintain a function so that the Terran player here has some capability to defend themselves, to provide... I need like sufficient build space. Need all that junk. So this is okay build space, but really the problem is that there's not a huge amount of flexibility when it comes to like moving. I actually really like the shape of it too, but you can't really use the ridges that well. They're not usable. Like these left and right ones could be, but even then I have to put the ramps on the outside. So I don't really know what to make of that. I guess maybe it would feel a bit better if I were able to move it further away a little bit from the centerpiece so that it feels a bit more removed. And then I could keep the same pattern, but maybe have... I really like the idea of the Terrans being settled into definitively Protoss territory. Like, there'll be a high temple over here that seals the deal for this base, I think, for for Chase's main force. And that's going to obviously be pretty, like, telling. Like, oh yeah, he really took over here. But I don't know. I have to think about that, because I think that it can be... I like the layout, I like the shapes. I think it could be satisfying. I think it can be functional. But it does feel a little bit too close, especially once I throw ramps down here. It's going to be a little more challenging to set that stuff up properly. So... Excuse me. This might be the first map without any water. Maybe I'll find some way to work it into one of the areas or something. But all right. So really, I only don't know what to do with the Zerg area right now. I have something of a starter for the Terran area. Protoss has got the most developed area right now, but even that needs some work. The whole thing needs some work, but we got a first draft layout done, so I'll take it. All right. Well, that'll do it for now. I know the last couple streams have been on the shorter side. It's not from lack of motivation as much as it is from lack of time. For example, I don't have that much longer before the local store closes, and I need to go there. So it's pretty much just stuff like that. But suffice it to say, we'll be back to a more regular schedule next week, by virtue of having less crazy things for me to do in the middle of the week. Like today was crazy busy. I'm happy that I was able to get this done all the same. So I guess that'll be that. We got some good work done on Deliverance's planning and on the third map's layout. I'm very pleased with that, despite the fact that it was only 2 hours. I feel like it was longer. I feel like I was actually working for longer, so that's good. Means I got more done than I anticipated. So join us tomorrow, probably in the morning this time, for another one of these streams. Thanks, Hoop Thrower, for hanging out. Thanks, Renato, for hanging out. I'll see you guys later on.